Hello everyone, this is Danielton, and with rumors stirring about an upcoming Resident Evil remake, I decided maybe it's time for a sequel. Before the release of the Resident Evil 4 remake, I made a wishlist video covering what aspects of the game I wanted to see changed, kept the same, or removed entirely, which I was pretty proud of. But now I think it's time for another deep dive into one of my top favorite Resident Evils. Well, we still don't know for sure what the new RE game will be, and personally, I'm hoping for a Code Veronica remake. I've decided to talk about Resident Evil 5, sincerely because I believe it has a better chance of being remade, and also because I've had a lot of fun memories with it. There are many aspects to this game that I like, maybe even love, but I can see that it has some faults to it, and I understand how it's a step down from RE4. When this game was first released, people didn't like it, saying it relied too much on action and not as much on the horror, as well as
It's in Africa. It's been in Antarctica. It's been, I think, in Spain. It's been in the Midwest. It wasn't racist then. Why should it be racist now? It's in Africa. Have fun with the game. Play the game.
Anyway, after many years, people have come to appreciate RE5, which I think is great. However, I would like to see how Capcom will revise this entry in the series, and I hope they put in as much effort as they did in the RE4 remake. Before I continue, I want to address that these are just my opinions and nothing in this video should be taken seriously. I am also open to other people's opinions, and if there are any other ideas that you would like to see in the RE5 remake, please let me know. I'm very curious to see what you guys think. Just remember to be nice in the comments, okay? This is the Resident Evil 5 wishlist. Oh, and I should also mention, there's spoilers. Let's begin with the game's introduction. For this one, I would want only Chris's perspective of what's going on to allow the story to tell itself instead of spoiling what the virus is. It's just a pet peeve, but when I saw this for the first time, I thought that it was trying way too hard to look epic and horrifying, seeing this dude about to turn, instead of allowing the player to experience it for themselves. Next up is something that is very essential to this game, something that could make or break the experience, and that is the co-op.
Welcome to Africa.
In this game, you're introduced to Sheva, and she is basically the second player who will fight alongside you. I really like her character, and I think she's a fitting partner for Chris. I just hope that they keep the co-op for the remake. I would love to see how a co-op story-based Resident Evil game will work now with the new RE engine. I know it will be tricky to balance the action and horror while also adding co-op to the formula, but I know Capcom can do it and make it great. Now for the main enemies, the Majini. It's apparent that they will be given more detail and unique designs in the remake. I'm sure the Majini will be given different clothing, hairstyles, facial features, and skin tones to differentiate from one another. As for the enemy's AI, I think Capcom will use the AI from the RE4 remake's Ganados and tweak them to make them a bit faster and more agile. I'm hoping that they make the enemies more tricky to learn and maybe add some unique ones. For this next part, I would like to see a slight change in the public execution. And for me, it would be to start the section by sneaking around the area and trying to reach the top of the scaffolding to save Reynard. But right before you make it, he is killed by the executioner. I say this because as it is, it just feels way too similar to RE4's village section. And I would just like to see them add a little extra to it. Speaking of which, I would also like to see more of the executioner. He is one of the coolest and most memorable looking monsters in RE5, and he only shows up once in the main game. I would place him somewhere in the oil factory or in the boat section in the third chapter. I would also design him to make him look more bloodied and messed up with cuts and gunshots all over his body, and even reveal a bit of his face. I think that would be awesome. The Majini Cephalos are pretty cool enemies with plenty of potential. The main problem I have with these enemy types is that the first one you encounter, they're essentially just Las Plagas but worse. To me, they weren't really a threat. The second ones, however, are much cooler designs and are much more dangerous. If they were to make new designs, I would want them to go all the way. Like, give them disgusting body horror like in John Carpenter's The Thing, and not just be like a huge centipede coming out of a person's head. Next up is the boss fight with the first Ouroboros, and this one is just straightforward. Just make the fight last longer. I have no problems with the design of the boss or even how you defeat it. I would just want the boss fight to go for 2 to 3 minutes long. Simply put a timer on the furnace and make the area you fight in a bit bigger, and maybe add some fuel canisters around the area. I'll go through this next one quickly since I've already talked about it in my last wish list, but I just have to bring up the game over death scenes. Maybe it's just because I'm a sadistic bastard or I'm just really immersed into my games, but I am hoping that they add a lot of effort into the kills in this game and make them look just as graphic as the previous game. Now we get to chapter 2, where we're introduced to the zombie dogs in this game, the Ajules. This one's pretty simple, but make an alternate design. I like their designs as is, it's scary and twisted, but what if instead of having the head split vertically, it was horizontal from the dog's mouth? I even made this sketch, and I feel like this would be a sick design, with the teeth and the super long tongue coming out. I think that would be cool. Another redesign I would like to see is the flying enemies, the Kepepios. These annoying enemies have plenty of problems with them, but for me, it would have to be their boring ass design. Let me explain. So you know how these enemies spawn from popping out of the enemies' backs? It would be cool to have these flying enemies incorporate some human features like the spine or the rib cage. They'll even have one with a head still attached. I would just want the developers to go crazy with these redesigns. The Chainsaw Majini. You can't go wrong with a simple chainsaw guy, but the only change I would like to see from these guys, which I'll explain later in the video, is to have them look different from one another. I think we can all agree that we got tired from seeing these chainsaw guys in the franchise, and it would be so much better if they had at least different outfits, face covers, and weaponry. Josh Stone is one of the new characters in the game that I really like. His role as the protective yet caring older brother, and the relationship between him and Sheva is just very charming to me. I would like to see this remake have him be in more of the story. The DLC Desperate Escape already has you play as Josh, but I would like to see him more of what he does behind the scenes in the main game. Kinda like what they did in RE4 with Luis. The mines I feel are a great idea that missed the opportunity to go truly scary. In this section, one player has to hold a giant flashlight while the other covers for them. Great idea, but the mine is simply just a straight line where you have to fight normal villagers. If they were to remake this section, I would make the flashlight dim in and out to add tension, and extend the first half of the mine to be more like an underground maze with multiple paths that lead to dead ends or treasures. I would also add a new enemy that would fit in this dark, spooky mine, just to make the area a lot more horrifying. Ricardo Irving. I'll go more in depth about his boss fight when I get to that point, but as for his character and his personality, I never really cared for this guy. Resident Evil 5 has plenty of characters that I like, but as for him, he was just a cocky, annoying businessman that was in need of some serious plastic surgery. His role in the game, to me, was pretty weak, and I feel like he could have been replaced with anybody else and it would have been the same. If they were to remake this game, they would have to severely revamp his character and delve into his backstory so he appears more serious and less like a goofy mafia reject. The Popo Karimu is a really fun boss fight, no complaints about that. The boss is great at teaching you how to use the explosive mines, and its weak point is pretty easy to find, but also hard to hit sometimes. The only changes I would make are the area where you fight in and its design. I feel like the area is a bit too big, and I think fighting it with limited space would go well since the boss can already fly. As for its design, I wouldn't change much, but maybe have it look more mutated for the second fight. But overall, keep this enemy in the remake. Next I want to talk about is the Savannah Chase. Personally, I like this part of the game. Making it like an arcade shooter, fighting motorcycle enemies and big trucks is very fun. But does it fit new Resident Evil style? I don't know. I think the remake should keep this in, but instead of motorcycle guys, Have ajules or kipepios chasing after you with the trucks coming in from time to time. I don't know, I'm just throwing ideas here. But I would hope they would add a part to this chase where you have to drive through a town with enemies from rooftops dropping stuff at you. I think that would be pretty cool. Now we get to Nidesu's boss fight, which I think is great. I don't care if he's a recycled El Gigante, I think he's awesome. And his boss fight being a turret section is fun as well, which makes this decision very conflicting. I like this boss how it is, but I also want this boss fight to be on foot, where you could run around and fight him like a regular El Gigante. But I know that would make the boss feel more like a copy and paste from RE4. So what if they added minigun turrets all over the arena and they can be destroyed or run out of ammo? Either way, this is a great boss that I'd like to see in the RE5 remake. Whatever they decide to do with him, I'm sure they won't disappoint. Now we get to my favorite section of the game. The Marshlands is amazing when it comes to atmosphere. It's eerie and unnerving. Just add a little bit of fog and change the time of day, and you've got something real spooky. I would want the remake to expand the Marshlands and add more places to explore. Put in key items, extra collectibles, or snakes! Kind of like how the RE4 remake did with the lake section. I think the Marshlands has the most potential out of anything in the remake. Which brings me to my next point. In this section, you fight these wetland type Majini who used to be members of a tribe called Nidipaya who are now infected by Las Plagas. I like how RE5 gives these guys backstories, and it really makes you feel bad for them. And I know that could be said about the townspeople as well, but for some reason, I just feel sad for these guys, especially knowing that they're the last of their tribe. As for their designs, I have no criticisms. The jungle clothes and tribal paint are great, and their weaponry of spears, bows, and arrows fit perfectly. If I were to design these guys, I would add details that show their culture. Maybe give them something that resembles a hierarchy, like masks, rings, or bracelets, as well as add level design elements that suggest a rich culture and history like a prophecy, similar to what the virus is causing now. I hope Capcom delves deeper into this tribe's backstory and gives them creepier designs to go along with it. The Marshlands also has one important factor that other sections don't have: crocodiles. Resident Evil has done a good job of making crocodiles terrifying before, so I'm hoping that they do that for this remake as well. I don't have a redesign for this because, they're crocodiles. So one thing I'll say here is, keep the crocodiles, please. Speaking of which, I also think they should keep the gondola part in the game. This is such a great idea. Riding on a slow-moving raft in crocodile-infested waters, that's a horrifying concept. I just wish it would have lasted a little bit longer. And also having Majini shooting arrows at you would increase the tension of having to shoot back at enemies while also doing QTEs to dodge hungry reptiles. That would be fun in my opinion. After the marshlands, we now enter the oil field, which is a pretty cool area, but also doesn't last very long. There are many things you can add to this part. How about instead of turning valves to clear your path, use keys instead and place them in different rooms around the factory. Have one be in a room filled with leaking pipes, and one player would have to go to a maintenance room and have to turn them off and on, and the other would have to traverse through to get the key. And for the other key, have them be guarded by these two chainsaw guys. Which brings me back to my point of redesigning these guys to look different, and not just their looks. I would give one the chainsaw and the other one like a cement saw, just to give a little bit of variety. Make one tubby, make one muscular so they could have more of a duo personality. Make it like the Bella sisters fight and you have to fight them in one room with the broken machinery all around. Just do something interesting with these guys, man. After the oil fields, you reach the docks, where you have to make it to Josh before the entire factory explodes. This sounds like a cool idea on paper, but in execution, I don't know. Personally, I would want them to keep it timed, but remove the countdown timer in general, and make a couple scenarios where you have to use teamwork and quick thinking to make this part more intense. For example, have a gate that only Sheva can get past, and she has to find a key to unlock the door for Chris. Also, I think having Josh snipe enemies along the way would be a cool idea to add as well. The boat section in Chapter 33 is great. Having you shoot enemies while on a boat and getting off of it from time to time to open gates is fun. It's also pretty difficult at times, which is exactly what I like about it. For this remake, however, I don't think it would hurt too much to add one more gate and make it like the previous one, but instead of turret guys, I feel like this would be the perfect place to bring back the executioner, but all bloodied and pissed off. We finally arrive at Irving's boss fight. And while I'm not a fan of Irving's character, I will say his boss fight is one of the best fights in the game. The design is awesome, the atmosphere is great, and the boss itself has a good balance of difficulty to it. I have nothing but good things to say about this boss, but I will say one thing I'd like to see added is to make Irving attack the boat from time to time. Just like in Del Lago's fight in RE4 Remake, have the boat take damage, and if it takes too many hits, it's game over. That would be a cool addition to an already awesome boss fight, I feel. The next chapter introduces the spider-like enemies called the Buikichwa, which have a similar look to the Drain Demos from Resident Evil 3. These guys are pretty hard to deal with, especially when they spawn in packs, and that's a good thing. The only thing I would change is their design, since it's kind of boring, and I would want a couple of them to have little egg sacs on their back, and whenever you kill them or shoot their egg sac, a bunch of tiny spiders come out that could stun you or poison you for a moment. I think that would add a little bit more to these guys. And next up is the Temple Run section. This part, as well as any other QTE section in this game, should cut down on the amount of QTEs. After seeing how RE4 Remake handled the original's QTEs, I actually have a good feeling that Capcom will tweak up these parts and actually have you run and jump instead of watching a cutscene that has you press a different button once in a while. After that, we get to this next section of the temple with these giant stairs. I hope that this remake doesn't remove this part because it's actually really fun to explore this temple, and the animation of these stairs assembling is so funny to me. I can see them making a few changes to it, like maybe adding a new enemy or adding like a spider nest in the middle of it. I don't really care, I'm just hoping that they don't cut this part out in the remake. Speaking of which, I also think that they should keep the second fight with the Popokarimu and make him a little bit more menacing with red eyes and have a mutated body. I also think it would be a cool idea to switch up where his weakness is. Since you already destroyed the front part of his lower body, have it be that his backside, which used to be covered by his armored exterior, now cracked and showing. That way, it would make the boss fight more unique and not feel like a recycled boss. The next part of the temple is this area with the giant light beam that instant kills you. I think this part is really interesting, having you run around the area collecting keys while also avoiding the beam of light. I also like how you can kill the enemies controlling it for an easier experience. I have good hopes that this part will stay in the remake. If anything, they would probably change the area around it and just keep the Tower of Light as is. That's my prediction. Once you complete that area, you now have to complete these puzzles using mirrors and beams of light. I like these puzzles. They're like a short break from all the shooting and action, and this concept can be greatly expanded upon, and that's what I'm hoping for. You can also add in traps if you do the puzzles wrong, like spawning groups of Buikichwa, and have the ceiling slowly coming down and crush you if you don't solve it fast enough. There are so many things that you could add to these puzzles, man. After that, we are introduced to the Stairway of the Sun, which is a pretty cool area in and of itself. Still, another story bit comes into play in the form of these progenitor flowers, which is basically where the Ouroboros virus came from. Aside from the files you read throughout the story, I would like to see the remake delve deeper into the origins of these flowers and Ouroboros in general. Maybe tie them into the prophecy of the tribal people I mentioned earlier. That'd be some deep shit, man. At this point of the story, we are introduced to the secondary antagonist, Excella Gioni. I really like her role as the sidekick to Big Bad Albert Wesker, and is certainly better than Irving's role. Although I am certain that they're gonna change up her personality to be more professional and less,
Oh, I have my eyes set on something much bigger.
I mean, I wouldn't mind if the remake redesigned her to be less voluptuous. I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do. But I'm betting that the remake might keep a bit of that cheesy seductress character. It'll just be a bit more subtle. Next up, we have Lickers, aka one of the best enemies in Resident Evil. I'm so happy that they brought these guys back in the remakes, and I'll be upset if they don't bring these guys back for RE5. As for their designs, there isn't much to improve on because it's already flawless. I mean, just look at these guys, they're adorable. So I'll just say this, give them a little extra detail like veins, bigger teeth, a spiky spine, and maybe add a variant with a grayer color scheme. I don't know, what do you guys think? The U8 is a boss fight that I personally have weird feelings about. Don't get me wrong, I love this boss fight. I think it's incredible, and the fact that its armor shell is so strong that E can't even take damage for rocket launchers, that's some great attention to detail. The location you fight it on is great too, but I do feel like it's out of place. Maybe the caves would have been a better place to put it. Not only that, but without any sort of lead up to the fight, it just feels out of nowhere. Lastly, I personally am not a big fan of the flying enemies that it spawns. They're so annoying to deal with, and I think it would have been better if it just spawned a bunch of spiders like Bui Quichuas. At least that would have made sense. So basically what I'm asking for is a proper lead up to the boss, maybe place it somewhere in the temples, and finally give it some minion spiders to fight along with it. And now we get to the worst enemies in the game. So far I've liked every single enemy, with some being okay at worst, but these soldier Magini, I am not a fan. Especially the ones with guns, screw those guys. If there's one thing I hope the remake changes, it would be these gun soldiers. It's parts with these guys that kind of hurt the experience for me. Hopefully the remake can fix these guys and make them more tolerable to fight. Maybe just give them crossbows and the melee guys some shields or something. As for the designs, I would like to go back to my first wishlist video. I've said before that I wanted to see a prison theme in RE4 remake, and while that didn't exactly happen, I'm gonna keep wishing for it because I still think fighting straight up prisoners or tech subjects would be way cooler than soldiers. Should have the research facility be connected to a prison somehow. Please Capcom, I need this. On the other hand, the Reapers are scary cockroach-like enemies with loads of potential. I don't know what it is, but the concept of giant bugs is something that I'm a huge fan of. If I were to make this human-sized nightmare be more horrifying, my idea would be to give it a human-like face. Keep the rest of the body as it is, but then make its head look more like a human with its jaw removed and replaced with bug mandibles. I think that would give the Reaper an uncanny valley level of scary. I don't know, I just think man-bug hybrids are a creepy concept, but what do you guys think? The second Ouroboros fight is basically an improved version of the first one. I still like using the flamethrower and having fire as its weakness, so the only thing I would change here is the design, since it's basically the first one but bigger. I know that's what most of the Ouroboros monsters look like, but for my redesign, I thought it would be better if it was on all fours and given a mouth and glowing eyes. There, a slight change that makes all the difference. We've arrived at this game's big twist. I kinda like the idea of Jill having been dead for years, and essentially coming back to be revealed as Albert Wesker's brainwashed puppet. It's definitely an interesting idea that makes for a powerful moment, for Chris to see his partner not dead, but also being manipulated by his arch nemesis. It also adds a lot of development to Jill's character, and it was even mentioned in one of the Resident Evil movies, Death Island. Like, that's crazy. Just like every character I've said so far, I would like this remake to add more to these characters and make them equally unique. As for a boss fight, I think it's a great concept and a nice breather from all the other bosses in the game, but after beating it the first time, you realize that it's way too simple and easy. Most of Jill's attacks are close range and are very easy to dodge. This makes the fight broken as you can literally walk back a bit, run behind her, grab her, and have the CPU shoot the device, over and over and over again. There were only a few times where she would run away and get enough distance to use her guns, so for this remake I would want them to tweak up this fight by making Jill's AI more smart and have more attacks. Another idea I have is instead of mashing buttons to remove the device, have it be more like the Dead by Daylight generators, where you have to press a certain button at a certain time, and if you miss too many times, you have to start over, or even worse, you get a game over. Whatever they decide to do, let's just hope that this remake improves this boss fight and makes it more intense. we've made it to the last chapter of the game, the ship, which I think is an awesome final area, and it has plenty of fun sections in it. Like the crane puzzle, where one player gets trapped in a cage and the other essentially has to reach a crane in order to free the stuck player. I wish they expand upon this concept and make a full puzzle out of it. Have it be where you have to use certain cranes to pick up storage containers blocking your path. Or have a puzzle where there's a set number of cage containers and you have to pick up one of them to advance, but each one of these cages has an enemy like Ajules or Reapers. That would be so fun. This ship also brings back an iconic enemy from RE4. And yep, they're just as cumbersome as they were back then. I already predict that these guys will be changed since Capcom did a great job in redesigning JJ and tweaking him to be less of a nuisance. In all honesty, the 4 remake did make me a fan of the big enemies wearing heads of farm animals. So for this remake, I thought it would be the funniest thing to have these guys wear heads of safari animals. Especially when you have to fight two of them, make one be a warthog and the other be a rhino, like Bebop and Rocksteady from Ninja Turtles. That would be freaking hilarious. I've already talked about QTE sections, and this one where you have to run from the giant Ouroboros, I would like it to be in-game. Have you actually run from it and have QTEs sometimes. Hell, even put some obstacles in the way that you have to shoot while it's still chasing you. I would just want this fight to be more immersive in my opinion. As for the fight against this behemoth, I think it's a great boss that feels triumphant and grand, and having to use the satellite laser to defeat it adds a lot of strategy to the fight. If there's one thing I would add, it would be to add a second phase. While it's fun, I do think it's pretty repetitive, as the only thing this boss fight can do is swing its giant tendrils and spawn little piles that hurt you. I think it would be cool if halfway through the boss destroys parts of the platform you're standing on. I like this idea because having limited space to run or dodge gives the player a sense of urgency. As the fight continues, more and more of your platform is destroyed, and the pressure builds on as by the end of it, there will be nowhere to run. Another thing I like to see extended is the final rush section before Wesker's fight. This area has a lot of craziness happening. In order to clear this section, you have to get past a bunch of soldier Magini, 2 Reapers, 2 Gatling gun guys, and the slowest opening gates that ever created. So here's how I would change it. 1. By having the gates open a little bit faster. 2. Have the section split into 4 instead of 3. And 3. Have each section be a gauntlet of different enemies. Let me explain this a bit more. In the first part, let's have you fight smaller enemies like Ajules or Bui Quichuas, but as you progress to the second and third parts, you have to fight bigger brooder enemies, including Reapers. And once you finally reach the 4th section, there you have Bebop and Rocksteady waiting for you. So what do you guys think? Now we've reached the boss fight with Albert Wesker. First off, I like how they developed this and all the other encounters with Wesker. Having him be invincible and super fast is great. The only thing I would change is how you beat him. There's nothing wrong with having to use the rocket launchers to stun Wesker, but what I don't like is having to turn off the lights to hit him with a rocket. It just seems really goofy to me. Even when I'm clearly in the open, he still can't find me. Like, does being superhuman also make you blind? Maybe you should take off those shades, genius. I feel like it would have been better if you had to use flash grenades or even a series of QTEs to be able to stun him. Overall, I like this fight, it's just that one thing that never made sense to me. Oh, it's not over though, as we've reached the final fight with mutated Wesker. I'll say this right now, this fight is stupid, but in the best of ways. It has great atmosphere, the fight itself has a lot of variety, and it created one of the best memes in Resident Evil history. I know a lot of people don't like this final boss, or even the fact that it was the last time we see Wesker in the Resident Evil timeline, but personally, I would even say the greatest villains have their end. And here, it couldn't have been more perfect. I mean, think about it. This is Chris Redfield versus Albert Wesker, something that we've been hoping to see since the first game. And if there's anything that Resident Evil 5 Remake will without doubt improve on, it's this. For me, the one thing I would like to see is to have Wesker gradually transform throughout the fight. It's the same thing I asked for with Krauser in the OG RE4, And that's the one thing that would bring this final boss up from awesome to incredible. Again, I don't have a sketch here because I am curious to see what the remake will do for this boss. We're done with everything I wanted to cover in the main story. However, there's still the DLC and side content that I want to look over. Ever since Separate Ways was dropped and seeing how much good content was added to that DLC, it makes me excited to see what Capcom plans to do with RE5's DLC and see which parts will be changed or removed. Let's begin with Lost in Nightmares, which is basically a prelude to the main story. The main enemies that you'll be facing in this DLC are these guys, blobs. I'll start off by saying that I love the idea of these guys, having been human prisoners that have been used as lab rats. It really shows in their designs. They're creepy and gross looking. The only thing I'm disappointed with is that they only have one design. You only fight a handful of these guys, and they all look the exact same. I just wish they had multiple models with different looks and different weaponry like swords, axes, or hammers. Speaking of enemies, that is the only thing I feel like this DLC is lacking. To be fair, the DLC is mostly about puzzle solving, but still, I would like to see some variety. I mean, look at Separate Ways. They've added a new enemy that was never seen before in the original. Capcom has this opportunity to add entirely new monsters and make it work. So that's what I'm hoping for here. More special enemies, please. Now we get to talk about Oswald E. Spencer, the true mastermind, the man behind the camera, the creator of Umbrella and all of its creations, and this is all we see of him. I know there's a cutscene in the main game that introduces Spencer, but I wanted to bring him up here simply because I thought they were going to give him more screen time, but nope. Although Spencer isn't as big of a villain as Wesker, he's still one of the most important antagonists in the Resident Evil franchise. So I wish that they'll give Spencer at least a little bit more screen time in the remake, or at least put in some backstory. Maybe some reference to Mother Miranda from RE8, that would be cool to see. Now let's move on to Desperate Escape, which starts immediately after Chris and Sheva save Jill from mind control. After separating, Jill meets up with Josh and they both try to catch up with Chris and Sheva. I really like this perspective because even though we technically know what's going to happen, we get to see how Jill arrived with Josh in the first place. I also like their interaction and how they work off each other. I would like to see more of that because I do think that their interactions are funny, especially with Josh's soldier buddy Doug. I want to see more of that. Shut up, Doug! Unlike Lost in Nightmares, Desperate Escape is reliant on the action, and that's where it kind of falls apart for me. I like the action in this game, but that's all this DLC it really has. There's no puzzle you have to solve or interesting sections, and again, there are not even any new enemies. I mean, they did bring back the Executioner with a different skin, but to be honest, it looks awful, so I won't count it. So that's what I'm expecting for this remake. More interesting sections like puzzles, less reliance on action, and new enemies that don't look like weird gimps. The final area is probably the best part of this DLC. It's a simple survive till the end section. I have no problems with this part, but I do wish that the difficulty or number of enemies increased throughout the duration of this part. As it is, it seems like it gets hard by the end, but in actuality, you're dealing with normal enemies, and then occasionally you have to fight a Gatling gun dude or a Reaper. Which is good, but I want it to be more like a progression thing. Like you start with normal enemies, and then you progress with tougher enemies that by the end, you're dealing with 2 or 3 Reapers. I know that sounds like a lot, and it is, but that's kind of my point. I would want the players to be overwhelmed during that last 20 or 30 seconds. It raises the stakes and builds up the tension in a way that I kind of like. And if necessary, just make the area bigger to fight in. Now we have come to the best side mode Resident Evil has ever done. It goes without saying that the mercenaries will be added to the remake, but what characters and maps will be included? Let's see. RE5 already has a great selection of characters, but most of them are just reskins with different weaponry. While I don't have any problems with these, I am predicting that the remake might trim the fat and include more interesting characters. So here are my top 3 picks. My first one would be RE4 Leon, because of course. The second one would be RE2 Claire, because I predicted her last time and it didn't really happen. And lastly, I will say RE3 Jill because I think it would be cool if you had Battlesuit Jill, BSAA Jill, and RE3 Jill in the same mercenaries. As for maps, there's a great variety of locations from the main game, but there are also a couple like the prison, which I freaking love, that were specifically made for mercenaries. I hope that this remake won't be cutting any of these maps and actually add some additional ones. And even if I made this prediction before, I'd still like to see maps from previous remakes like RPD and Downtown Raccoon City. I am not giving up on this prediction, okay? Lastly, just because it's here, let's talk about Versus Mode. Versus Mode is where 2 to 4 players battle or team up online to see who gets the most points. I don't know for sure, but apparently people online really seem to like this mode. And you know what? Good for them. However, I have a feeling that Capcom won't include this mode in the remake. The reason I think this is because Resident Evil has already tried going down the road of online multiplayer with games like Resistance and RE-Verse, and they didn't perform that well. I could be wrong, but personally, I think Capcom will leave out Versus. But I don't know, let me know what you guys think. Should they keep this Versus mode in the remake or not? There's plenty of cut content that I'd like to discuss, but the ones I like to see be brought back are the cut bosses like the U9 and the U11. For short, the U9 was a creature concept that has similarities to the Ouroboros monsters we see in the game. The main difference, however, was in its size, as it essentially was supposed to be 80 feet or even taller than the Ouroboros Aheri. To put that into perspective, the Ouroboros Aheri was roughly 100 feet tall. So in short, it's a ginormous beast that would have been awesome to fight in the final game. Now, the U11 was originally supposed to be Irving's boss, and you would have to essentially be fighting him on top of a moving train, kind of similar to Simmons' boss fight in Resident Evil 6. Still, I wish that this boss fight was included in the game in some shape or form. We'll just have to wait and see what Capcom decides to do with these cut enemies. And that's the end of my wishlist for Resident Evil 5 Remake. This one didn't take nearly as long as the last wishlist, so I think I'm getting the hang of this whole structured video making stuff. Like I've said before, I hope that Capcom does this remake justice as well as the entire franchise because the series is going strong so far and I'm excited to see what's next for Resident Evil. Anyway, if you like this video, please give it a huge thumbs up. Leave a comment if you agree or disagree with anything I've said here. I'm very interested to see what you guys think. And if you want, why not subscribe as well? I would really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you boulder punching assholes later. Peace out. What does a blue, green, yellow, red herb mix look like? The world will never know.